Finding My Path to a Better Life for Me, Episode 2. Hi, I'm Stephen Chalmers. Delighted you are here. Welcome to my new series. It's a 6-part series, Pursuing the Life My Heart Longs For. In this series, 6 episodes long, I'll go over 6.5 chapters from my life change journey, 6.5 very important chapters. Now, if you've not yet seen episode 1, I encourage you to go watch that. There's also an episode 0 that gives you an overview of this series. It kind of tells you about it and tells you why I put it together. So let's dive in. Episode 1, I covered how in summer of 2011, I was defeated, I was burned out, I was desperate for a whole new life. I had some heartaches, I had some obstacles that was going on. I covered those in episode 1, and I was facing a really big question. What would I do next professionally, and what path would I take to get to where I wanted to go? 4 things inspired me to the path I eventually took. A book I read in 2009, a book I read in 2010, a life-changing meal I had the fall of 2010, and a TV show I absolutely loved. Now, I mentioned 2 books that I read. The first of those books I read in 2009. It was Gary Vaynerchuk's book, Crush It. And what I got out of that book is that you could create content and build yourself a professional brand that would grow into a full-time career. And I read that book, and the thoughts in that book, it kept rattling around in my noggin and rattling around my noggin. In 2010, the second book I read that really stuck with me, that really inspired me for the path I took. Now, I read lots and lots of books, but these 2, they haunted me. That second book was Tribes by Seth Godin. And there's a line in that book that just stuck in my craw, like it was like in neon for me. We need you to lead us. And I'd burned out in the nonprofit world. I'd done a lot of leadership stuff. I didn't want to lead anymore. I didn't know if I even could do it anymore. And we need you to lead us. It's like, ugh. But the thing I got out of that book is that you can create content, you can build a community around that content, and you can make a big difference in the lives of people. And boy, those 2 books, they stuck with me because I wanted a whole new career and making a big difference in the lives of people. That's a value I hold near and dear. So the third thing that inspired me for the path I took to head off toward the life my heart longs for was a magnificent meal I had the fall of 2010. Now, a friend of mine took me to a food cart. He knew food carts were awesome. He introduced them to me, and I went to this food cart. It was a great food cart, but it was my first experience. He ordered from this weird box. We had to walk across the street and sit in these little concrete pillars, and there's no picnic tables, there's no chairs. It just kind of weirded me out. I just couldn't get my mind around it. And he knew that I was a knucklehead. He knew food carts were great. And he said, okay, Stephen, I'm going to take you somewhere that's going to blow your mind. So the next week, on a Friday afternoon, he took me to the Lardo food cart. Chef Rick Gencarelli, absolutely love him. He's an amazing chef. He was in the process of building himself a whole new career and a life he absolutely loved. He's making these amazing sandwiches in the Lardo food cart. So we sat at this picnic table, and I tell you, he was completely right. I was blown away how good it was. I remember sitting there, fall of 2010, at that picnic bench there at that food cart pod. It was the Good Food Here pod, and saying, wow, we got to start a website and tell everybody about the incredible food you can get at Portland Food Carts. Now, a week earlier, I wasn't even sure I liked him and couldn't figure him out. A week later, I'm just so excited about him, want to start a website about them. And that magnificent meal, and it really was phenomenal, it stayed with me for the entire year. Now, the 4th thing that inspired me for the path that I ended up taking, the path that I chose, was Anthony Bourdain's show, No Reservations. May he rest in peace. We lived off a house off 148th Division for a long time, rented a house there, and it had a downstairs, a daylight basement. Downstairs was bedrooms. The 3 Z's had bedrooms down there, my kids, and there was a base downstairs, a big family room. We had a TV in there, and from about 2005 on, I would watch episodes of No Reservations, often with the kids, often with the 3 Z's. And Anthony Bourdain at the beginning of that show would say, I write, I eat, I travel, and I'm hungry for more. And man, it moved me every single time because I wanted to write, I wanted to eat, I wanted to travel, I wanted to go on adventures like that. And the more I thought about those 2 books, and I thought about the incredible meal, and I thought about Anthony Bourdain and his journeys, finally I said, I'm going to go for it. To heck with it. I said something out loud to myself in a dirt driveway in Southeast Portland, summer 2011. I said something ludicrous and ridiculous, but I said it anyways. I said, if Anthony Bourdain can get paid to eat and drink, so can I. I'm going to head out after it. So I decided right then and there, I'm going to build myself a whole new career. I'm going to upgrade my life personally. I'm going to upgrade my life professionally. Now, I had a specific game plan. We'll get into that in just a second. But I have to tell you about the 4 goals that I also set that same summer of 2011. So as long as I was going for it, as long as I was going to put together a life that I actually wanted, there was 4 goals I really wanted to have happen. And so that was to become an author, a writer, a speaker, and self-employed. And you may say, well, why those 4 goals? I'm so glad you asked. So author. Very early in my childhood, I loved books. Books were one of the bright spot in my dark and very unpleasant childhood. I remember at a really early age, I read The Hobbit. That had a big impression on me. J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit. There was adventure, the good guys won, but there was still evil in the world. There was still darkness in the world. I know that there are a lot of people out there that have the luxury of having never experienced evil and think, oh, there's no such thing. Trust me, there's such a thing. But that book just really, really spoke to me. To this day, I've got an article on StephenChalmler.com about my Tookish friends. Those are people that Bilbo Baggins, he had both Baggins ancestry and Took ancestry, and it was the Took side of him that wanted him to head off on adventures and see waterfalls. And in my experience, it's the people who want to change their life and they hear that call from a distant land, to something more to life than the life they're living. Those are the people that often I call them Tookish hearted. I need to make a video about that. But I love books. I always have been. In fact, if you go to StephenChalmler.com, I have a tab at the top, books that changed my life, and they're written roughly in the order that I read them. If you're interested in seeing the books that impacted me from an early age on. So I love books. I love authors. I still remember the time an author moved down the road from where I lived, and I was there the day that the book arrived in the mail, the first book she'd ever written, and that was a big deal. It blew my mind. I met a real life author. I'd heard about Franklin W. Dixon, my Hardy Boys books, and J.R.R. Tolkien. I never thought I'd meet a real life author. It kind of blew my mind. And when I was 16 years old, a dream was ignited in me that someday I would become an author. I made a decision, someday I'm going to write a book. And for years, for 29 years, I would wander bookstores. I love bookstores. I love looking at books. And I always said, someday I'm going to take a book off the shelf that I wrote. My name will be on the spine. It'll say Chalmler there on the spine. And I'll take it up to the counter, and that will be the day that I become an author, the day that I buy a book that I wrote at a bookstore. And for every author, there's a different, the day they became an author. But that's the day I became an author. For me, it's the day that I bought a book with my name on the spine. That day actually happened. It was a Thursday, April 17th, 2014. It's a really cool story for another time. But I'll be telling that story soon. It's out of a lot of emotion. It's pretty amazing. But yeah, being an author, long-held dream for me. It took me 29 years to make it come true. But that's why that was one of those goals I set in 2011. Something I'd always wanted to do, so what the heck? Let's go for it. I'm going to become an author. Now here's the conundrum. If you'd asked me, Stephen, can you become an author? If the summer of 2011 you said, Stephen, you just set a goal to become an author. Can you become an author? I would say, no, I cannot become an author. And you'd go, what? Well, are you going to do it? Yeah, I'm going to do it anyways. I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to figure out some way around the fact that I know I can't. I know that sounds really bizarre, but there's a reason I knew I couldn't become an author. And that's why I set that second goal to become a writer. So when I was in high school, I had a conflict with one of my teachers, Mrs. Todd, AC's mom. AC was one of our students. We loved AC. He was one of our classmates. But boy, his mom was just an absolutely awful teacher. And we had an assignment, part of the curriculum, we had to write a story. And I was terrified. I didn't want to write a story. I didn't see myself as a writer. It felt beyond me, because I had idolized authors. And I took forever to do it. And, I had to do it to maintain my 4.0. So finally, I wrote the story. I was kind of I was like the goody two-shoes kid. You met a liked me in high school. I met a liked me in high school. 4.0. Tragically, always trying to be good enough, to do good enough, to prove my value through achievement. That never actually works. But I wrote the story in Robin Hood. I was really proud of it. I was excited about it after I wrote it. There was a waterfall, and he had a lair there behind it. That was his headquarters that he hung out with, all of his people. And I just was so excited about this. And she said, okay, well, now you need to redo it because you wrote it the wrong way. And for whatever reason, I can be defiant at some odd times. And I just got incredibly defiant. Like, no, I'm not going to rewrite it. This is my story. I wrote it, and I guess maybe it was standing up for myself as an artist, even though I didn't know it. This is my story. I wrote it, and you can't control it. You can't make me write the story you want me to make. This is my story. I created this. I didn't have those words, but I definitely had that intense energy. And so eventually we kind of got into it. She sent me to the principal's office. And I remember the principal, Jim Hines, kind man, miss him very much. He was shocked. He's like, Stephen, what are you doing here? Because I was the one, I went to a small private school, and I was the kid that took parents around on a tour of the school. They'd set me loose with the parents to give the parents and the visiting kids, say, hey, we want to send our kid to the school. I gave the tours. He goes, what are you doing here? And I said, well, she wants me to do this, and I'm just not going to do it. And he said, well, I said, I'm not going to do it. You can suspend me. You can expel me. I will not do this. And furthermore, she's a bad teacher. She's hurting me. She's hurting my classmates. She's hurting your students. You should fire her. And he realized I wasn't going to back down, and just the fact that it was so odd to him that I was even doing this, it was just incredibly out of character for me. So we went down, kind of smoothed things a little bit, and he left, and her and I were kind of visiting, kind of still tussling a little bit, and she said, well, fine, you won this, and one of us is not going to make it through the end of the year. And I said, that's right, one of us will not make it through the end of the year. And I'm delighted to tell you she was fired before the year was out. I'm very glad for that, because she was a terrible teacher. I just don't do well with bad teachers or teachers that discourage kids. She said, fine, that may be true, but hear this, you will never be a writer. And it was almost like, like in those books, where someone gets cursed, because that became a defective story that went right to my heart that I believed. And so I started carrying around, you'll never be a writer. So at 16 years old, I said, I'm going to become an author someday. But if you're going to become an author, you have to write a book. And if you can't be a writer, you can't write a book. So I was stuck. I was really, really stuck. So I set the second goal that I would somehow, some way, summer 2011, I set that second goal that somehow, some way, I would become a writer. Now, I got to tell you something about defective stories. When I work with people for life change, they often have defective stories that aren't true, that aren't working for them, that they don't even know they have. And a lot of the reasons they're not achieving or pursuing their life or changing their life or advancing or making things better because they have some defective story holding them back. And I'm telling you, one of the things I love doing is, in my life story alchemy work, I help people transform their life story from the ordinary to the extraordinary. And I help people change their defective stories, transform their defective stories from defective stories to thriving stories. But in that process, if you ever try to do that, you need to keep this in mind. Defective stories fight back. Defective stories don't like giving up, and I tell you, they fight back. But really, don't let defective stories hold you back. And that defective story held me back for many, many years. But quickly in 2011, I discovered the secret to becoming a writer. And here's the secret that usually only writers know. And if you want to become a writer, let me tell you that secret I learned right now. Writers write. It's that simple. If you want to become a writer, just start writing. As soon as you start writing, boom, you're a writer. Somehow, some way in my noggin, it was some mystical, magical thing, and I had to figure something out, and I realized, oh, I'm a writer. I'm writing. It wasn't quite that simple, as you'll see in a second, in my head, but practically, once you start writing, you're a writer. And I got to tell you, if you want to be a writer, start writing. Do not say, oh, I want to be a writer, so I'm going to take a writing class, or I'm going to writing school, or I'm going to read a book on how to become a writer. Do not do that. Just start writing. Because what I find with a lot of people is when they try to learn the right way to write, they don't find their writer's voice. It took me a long time because of a lot of insecurities and fears to find my writer voice, but you got to find your writer voice. The way you become a writer is you write. Going to writing school does not make you a writer. Taking a writing class does not make you a writer. Reading a writing book does not make you a writer. Start writing, and then if you want to be a better writer, then maybe as long as those classes and teachings and lessons books will protect your voice, maybe that's the way if you become a better writer. But all that other nonsense does not make you a writer. Now, I have come across one really good book on being a writer. Stephen King has a great book on writing. I encourage you to read that after you start writing. Start writing, then read stuff like that to become a better writer. Okay, enough on that tangent. Now, I want you to know how tyrannical and how deep that defective story was of me that you'll never be a writer. My first book was published. A publisher published my first book in 2014. My second book was published in 2015. And even though I'm now a published author, I still didn't feel like a writer, like I didn't belong, like I was an imposter, like I really shouldn't be at a writer's meeting. If there had been one, I would have felt awkward being there, which is ridiculous. It wasn't until February 13th, 2016, it was a Saturday night, one of the worst weeks of my life, and that Saturday night I had a whole bunch of experiences, and that night I knew I have to write about all of this. And it hit me, wow, if I have to actually write about this stuff, I guess I actually really am a writer. And for the first time in my life, February 13th, 2016, I thought, wow, I really am truly a writer. So that was very liberating to me, but it took a long, long time for that defective story to be rooted out of me. The third goal I set was to be a speaker because I absolutely love public speaking. A lot of people hate it. They can't stand it. I love it. I enjoy it. I love speaking in front of a crowd. I'm really good at it. I did lots and lots of public speaking when I was my 10 years in the nonprofit world. If you want me to come speak at your event, go to StephenSchamler.com. I've got a page, a tab at the top, the speaker you want. I cover topics that I often teach about, but people have heard some of my videos and say, hey, we know you did a video on this, or we did a teaching on that, but it's not on your speaking list. Can you cover that? Yes, I would be glad to come to your group and cover that topic. So if you want me to speak, I'd be glad to do it. I'm really good at it. And yes, I am the speaker you want. So that was a goal I set, speaker. And the fourth goal I set summer of 2011, writer, author, speaker. The fourth goal is self-employed. Now, the reason I set that goal was really because of my experiences at Thanksgiving and Christmas working in the corporate banking world. So the week of Thanksgiving would come, and the big boss doesn't even show up to work on Monday. You know, he or she's off to their second home. I have no problem with that. I think it's great to own a second home, but they're not even there Monday. And then the big boss is there Monday, but not Tuesday. They send an email, walk around, see everybody on Monday. Hey, get your stuff done. And Monday night or Tuesday morning, they're off to their second home. And then the manager would come in Wednesday morning, and everyone's got to work till 5, make sure everybody shows up, make sure they're going to work, and then they're gone by 10. And they also send an email, and then they're out by 10. Yet we had to stay and work until Wednesday evening at 5, and then we had to work again on Friday. And of course, none of the executives are working the Wednesday before Thanksgiving or the Friday after Thanksgiving. And in the parts of the banking world I was in, it was a dead day. Nothing was happening in the parts of the banking world I was in. Why? Who pickled your brains? Why are we doing this? It was ridiculous to me. And Christmas was the same way. The parts of the banking world I was in, nothing happened on Christmas Eve day. There was no reason for us to be open on Christmas Eve day. You got to stay till 5, and you're lucky if they let you go at 2 o'clock, except the executives, they're not working Christmas Eve day. The managers, the bosses, the big bosses, the executives, they're not working Christmas Eve day, so it's actually not really that important. They just kind of make sure everybody else is there in the office. I think one of the benefits of the pandemic is work from home, and some of that office control nonsense hopefully is going to go away. But that's stuff stuck in my craw. And I want to be self-employed so that I can take Christmas Eve day off whenever I want. If I don't want to work Wednesday before Thanksgiving, now I'm the one in the mirror that gets to make that decision. Now, I love being self-employed. Monday mornings, people hate their Monday mornings. I remember many times, driving into the office, driving down 205 or driving up I-5 and heading into the office. And those are freeways in the Portland metro area. And now one of the things I love to do occasionally, once in a while on a Monday morning, is I'll head down to what I call the office. It's a dive bar, right down the street from me, downtown, and where I live. And I go into that dive bar and I have just a chicken. They have a great breakfast there. And man, a dive bar breakfast, there's nothing like it. And 10 o'clock in the morning, I have a chicken fried steak, and which is just phenomenal. With 2 fried eggs and some hash browns and an IPA, and man, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm self-employed. I can do this. I didn't have to get to the office at 8 or 9 o'clock. Another joy to me being self-employed, my wife and I will slip off, on a Monday or a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and we'll go to a matinee and see a movie. And the theater right in our little downtown, it's really cool. It's a small little theater, and we can go in and see a first-run movie, normal movies, but they have popcorn, they have wine, so we have a glass of wine, we have some popcorn, we watch a movie, and I still feel like I'm getting away with something, not having to be in the office the middle of the day and out seeing a movie. I tell you, I'm so glad I'm self-employed. But those are the 4 goals I set: writer, speaker, author, self-employed. So I mentioned I had a game plan. So yes, I made this decision that I was going to totally create a new career out of thin air, upgrade my life personally and professionally, and I set those 4 goals. But I had an actual game plan. I was going to build myself a website, and I was going to write articles about Portland food carts, publish those on those websites. I was going to build myself a professional brand that would grow into a full-time career. Now, how would that happen? I didn't actually know. I'll come back to that in just a second. Basically, I was going to become a content creator, and I didn't have that language at that time. But content creators today, you can start a website and have articles that people read. You could start a podcast. You could record podcasts that people listen to, or you could start filming videos that people watch. And depending on how you're creating that content, you can start to grow a fan base, and that can grow into a full-time career. Now, I had this game plan, but I did not know how. How would my writing articles about food carts and putting on my website and harnessing the power of social media and leveraging the power of storytelling, how would that result in me having income? How would I monetize it? I had no idea. And I did not let that stop me. And I can't tell you how many people would say, well, I know what you're trying to do, but how are you going to monetize it? And I'd say, I don't know. And they'd look at me like I'd lost my mind. And I'd say, I'm 6 months in. I started January 1, 2012. We'll get into my timeline the next episode. But I started January 1, 2012, and 6, 9, 12 months in. I had so many people say, well, yeah, but Stephen, how are you going to monetize this? How is this going to work? And I'd say, I don't know. I just know that I believe that if I create content and I stick with it and I harness the power of storytelling, I leverage the power of social media, it's going to work. And so many people, they let the they don't know how it's going to work, and that holds them back. And sometimes if you wait till you have it all figured out, you'll never actually get started because sometimes you don't have it all figured out. So I would encourage you, don't let how hold you back. So I mentioned in the last episode that in the summer of 2011 we moved into the middle half of an unheated, unfinished single-car garage. And let me bring some closure to that. We lived there for about 6 months. It was the last week of November, which is of course often when Thanksgiving occurs. It was just before Thanksgiving. Thanks to the assistance of my dear friend and my sister in quotes, Jackie, and her husband Billy, we were able to move out of that situation into a really small apartment. And I'm telling you that Thanksgiving, I was so thankful and so grateful, to go to Winco and get a few items. And once again, we had our own kitchen and our own little apartment, and we were together, being able to cook that Thanksgiving meal. I was so grateful to no longer be living in a garage. And the other thing I did during that time, that fall of 2011, is I went to a lot of food carts. I was learning about the food cart scene, and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't take any photos. I didn't take any notes. When I could, had funds, I'd eat at a food cart, and I got to know the pods. So even though I really didn't do a lot of things right looking back, I still was out there doing something, and I was getting to learn about the Portland food cart scene. I was learning a lot about who the players were, where the carts were. I was educating myself, and that turned out to be very, very helpful down the road. The other thing I did, I think I mentioned in the last episode in the fall of 2011, is I built myself a website. It was an ugly website, but it worked. It did what it needed to do. I set up a Facebook page. And January 1, 2012, I had published on my first article. I'd gone to a food cart in December and taken photos, and I wrote up an article, and I hit publish on that January 1, 2012, and I was so excited. I was enthusiasm on fire, and I put my first post up and told everybody I could, hey, I've put up an article, and I've got a Facebook post. And I kind of laugh at myself now, but that's how it all began. So what happened next? January 1, 2012, I posted my first article. I put it on Facebook. I was so excited. What happened next? Well, to get the rest of the story, you're going to have to meet me at episode 3. Episode 3 is entitled My 3-Year, 6-Day March to Victory. I'll see you there.